Tonight I watched a movie that I had done a reaction video for months ago, and it was for a movie called Don't Let Go. And I remember that I really liked the concept. I was very drawn in to the premise of this story because I like things like this. It reminds me a lot of the movie Frequency, which was a really good film. I like that a lot too. The whole aspect of being able to communicate with someone in a different time than you. I mean, I find that so fascinating. But, kind of like time travel type stuff, except not really, sort of, kind of, time, I don't know, whatever. I like that sort of thing. So I was able to get a chance to watch this movie finally. And before I watched it, I had checked out the Rotten Tomatoes score, and the critics were not kind to it, but the audience was much more generous. In this instance, I do find myself siding more with the audience than the critics. However, having said that, I think I get where some of the critics were coming from with their more negative commentary. I haven't read any of the critical reviews. I haven't even read the audience reviews. I was just looking at the aggregate score on Rotten Tomatoes. But with regard to negative stuff about this movie, something that I noticed right off the bat was, so it gets started, and right away, the very close relationship between this character and his nephew is established. And then not long after that, as the trailer indicates, his nephew and her father and mother, and her father is his brother, they all get slaughtered. And then the story progresses from there. You know, that they have the funeral, he's mourning, he gets a phone call from her phone. And the first time that it happens, he's not quite, it doesn't happen exactly the same way that it showed in the trailer. It's a little bit different. Like what they showed in the trailer was a different scene, because by then he had already been talking to her, but they overlaid the voice from a different scene. So it's like they had two different scenes they were showing, and that scene that they were showing was not the actual first time that the phone call happened. Well, he eventually figures out that he is getting this phone call from his niece, who is like 2 weeks into the past. So she hasn't died yet. So he realizes he's got a chance to try to save her and her family. And he's trying to solve, the killing of his brother and his brother's family was made to look like a murder-suicide because his brother had had some problems with drugs, and so the police, bought into that setup. And he starts to dig more and more into the situation, and he realizes, no, it wasn't, and he's having his niece do some detecting or detective work for him 2 weeks in the past so he can try to figure out ways to solve this crime and save his family, his brother's family. And there are times where, there are times as the story goes along that the future, or this main character, gosh, I can't remember his name. Was it Joe, maybe? Oh my gosh. I do not remember the character's name, and I just watched it a few hours ago. Good night. Anyway, I want to say Joe. I might be wrong, but I don't want to pause this video and go look it up. But let's say Joe. So if I say Joe, I'm talking about the MC here. And if I'm wrong, please forgive me. But what was I saying? Oh, I know what I was saying. That there are times during the course of the story that Joe's present, which is of course this child's future, where things will happen in her time frame that does affect the future. It does change things. And so when that happens, he goes through this, boy, it's late. Sorry, my tongue is a little bleh. He goes through these weird, it's almost like he's having a seizure, but not really quite that dramatic. He's just like things are happening and he's sort of able to sort of see these things that are changing or whatever. I mean, that's the way I took it. And then he sort of comes to, and it's all different from what it had been at the time before this event happened, because of something that she was able to do to cause changes that occurred. But he still has to find a way, because things change, since the timeline changes, things then get altered in the little girl's, or his past, the little girl's time frame. So it's like this, race to figure out what the heck is going on and how to be able to stop what's going to happen to his niece. And she, so I've given you the synopsis. I'll tell you what I think negative reviews stemmed from. Well, at least to me, this is what I think it would be. So in the beginning, we never really see his brother, and we never see his brother's wife. We only see his niece and their interaction. And then it's not like she calls him all the time during the day. They're really close. Her father's a little bit of a loser. Like, he kind of doesn't step up and, father her. He's not there for her. She needed a ride at the very beginning of the movie and he wasn't there. So she called her uncle, and then it shows other scenes where she's calling him and they're just talking, like uncle and niece sort of stuff, And then he comes to their house and they're all dead. So you see the wife laying on the floor. He finds his niece. I think he finds her in the bathtub. I think that was her. It was her in the bathtub. And then he finds his brother. And he's hugging his brother and he's crying. And I don't feel like this super close connection with his loss. Not that I don't sympathize with it, but it's not as impactful to me because we never saw his brother before. We didn't see any interaction he had with the rest of his family. And so that it kind of severs. I mean, you see more of his brother and the brother's wife as the movie progresses in the child's time frame. But because you didn't see it, so you get a little bit more attached to them then, but because you didn't see it in the beginning, you just feel a little bit distant and removed from the tragedy that happened. I mean, you feel sorry for his character because he's very clearly mourning, and you feel bad for him, but you don't feel that deep connection with the other characters who got killed. It just happens. Okay? And so that was the first thing I noticed. The other thing I noticed, and maybe this was just me not paying complete attention, there were some things that the characters did that I didn't really understand. Like, why, or is he or she doing this and that or whatever? And I couldn't tell you now what it was because I didn't write it down, but I just remember it happened more than once. It was at least 2 or 3 times that something that happened just didn't make any sense to me at all. That's not a huge issue for me. I would say the bigger issue would be the lack of connection that the audience might have with his brother and his brother's wife, because they're never shown really in the beginning. But anyway, with regard to this story, I liked it. I thought it was good. And I'll tell you, I sort of kind of guessed who was behind what had happened. And I was right in some respects, because at one point I guessed something different, but still involving that same person. And it ended up that I was wrong about the other thing, but I was still right about this original suspect that I had. And, that becomes revealed as the story goes on. And the climax is quite climactic. It's pretty tense. There were several moments where this little girl, her life was in peril because she was starting to dig for information at her uncle's request, and she was putting herself in danger. And, she's always traveling on her little bike. There were scenes where she was being chased and she would have to physically haul her bike, and she was taking her bike with her, and wherever she had to go, through a fence or whatever, and pulling it through a door, and because I guess she could, feels like just drop the bike and run, but I don't know, felt like she wasn't able to pedal super fast sometimes, but and I would get really tense about what was going to happen to her. And but the way things came to a head, I felt was very well done, and certainly kept me in suspense because I was concerned that the story didn't go exactly in the way I thought it would with regard to how things happened. But I'm not necessarily disappointed at the way it ended up. It just wasn't quite as traditional or expected as I thought it would be, but that's not necessarily a negative. One final thing that would have been a negative in the eyes of the critics would be, so after it's all done, that's just abruptly done. There's no, like epilogue type scene, which I feel would have been kind of nice given everything that had happened. Would have been a little comforting to see, how things ended up afterwards, after everything was all done. But it was just over. That was it. Very abrupt. But, these things that I've mentioned, they really did not take away from my enjoyment of the film. I had a feeling I would like it. I went in expecting that I would like it, but that maybe I would notice some issues that possibly the critics had criticized it for. And I did pick up on some things, but in my opinion, it's not really enough to, if you think you're going to be interested in this, in my opinion, these little flaws or problems shouldn't be enough to keep you away from it. I think you'll probably still enjoy it. I don't know, maybe if you're, I don't know, maybe I've got a low bar for stuff like this, but the audience liked it too. And I don't think I would give it as high of a score as the audience did. I believe the audience on Rotten Tomatoes gave it like a 79%. I wouldn't give it almost 80%. I would say probably more like 70%, in the low 70s. Not down into like the 50s or 60s, but to me, a film that I think is pretty good, is passable, decent, at least 70%. A film that has issues with it to the point that I really notice it and it does kind of bother me, those slide down more into the 60s and 50s and stuff like that. This one, I would watch it again. So I'm going to try to talk my son into watching it with me because I think he'll probably like it. It was pretty decent. And I think that is all I have to say on this. Watch me forget something as soon as I stop recording. But yeah, if any of you guys have seen it, let me know what you think. And if you liked it, if you didn't like it, whatever. Curious to talk about it with other people because I haven't talked with anyone directly who has seen this themselves. So, okay, you guys, that's it for now. Adios.